Great, thank you. Hello and welcome everybody, and thank you first of all for taking the time and dialing in today. We're going to spend the next 90 minutes or so during this European Union Green Week to talk about access to career guidance, learning, and how career guidance and lifelong learning can be a building block for a just green transition. Before we really get started on the meat of the topic, we have a couple of announcements. This meeting will be recorded, so whoever does not consent to being recorded, I'd like to ask you to keep your please be so kind to keep your microphones muted during the duration of the unless you want to ask questions. And we'll get to the few who may not know Schmidt. I'm the director of the Just Skills Hub and a partner at SkillLab. At Skill
It seems we have lost Simon.
Sorry, did my video just drop there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Great. Where did you lose me?
You were introducing yourself.
Okay. This is great. So yeah, for those who have not met me before, my name is Simon Schmidt. I'm the director of the Just Skills Hub and a partner at SkillLab. At SkillLab, we build tools that with skills-first technology to create more equitable labor markets for our partners. We are leading the Just Skills Hub with the United Nations High-Level Champions for Global Climate Action, and we really work to co-create tools and toolkits that make sure that workers, communities, and employers affected by the transition to a green economy have access to career guidance and labor market information to make planning and action possible. We have the pleasure of hosting you all today alongside our partners at the European Training Foundation. The ETF is an EU agency that supports human capital development and really has career guidance and adult education at the heart of their work. And we believe that career guidance and education, adult education, should also be at the heart of the green transition. The transition to net zero already has and will continue to have tremendous impacts on labor markets, economies, governments, workers, and employers alike. In order to make sure that we address the needs of workers and that workers are not left behind, we need to support these career transitions. Today, we really want to discuss how adult learning and career guidance can play a role and can play an important part in supporting these transitions. In order to really help us talk about and figure out how we support workers and maybe more importantly, who's responsible for supporting workers, we've gathered a great panel today that can really shed light on the different aspects of providing agency to workers, providing options and support for workers. So we have with us today, in no particular order, Hae-Kyung Chun, who is a technical officer with the International Labour Organization, the ILO, within the Skills and Employability branch. Next we have Delphine Rodelli, who's the Director General of CMET. CMET is the employers organization for metal, engineering, and tech-based industries, representing over 200,000 European employers. Next, we have Jude Curtin-Darling. Jude is the Deputy Secretary General at Industrial Europe. Industrial Europe represents trade unions in the manufacturing, mining, and energy sector from 13 European countries. Next up, we have George Christopoulos. George is the Deputy Governor of DEPA. DEPA is the Greek Public Employment Service, and George leads DEPA's implementation of European Union funds, including the Recovery and Resilience Funds, financed massive up and reskilling program. And for the last two, you will not be able to tell, but they are in a room together. First, we have Tim Schreiber. Tim is a policy officer at the Directorate General for Employment at the European Commission. And Tim works on matters related to skills for the green transition and just transition. And last but not least, from our partner, the European Training Foundation, Romain Bottard. Romain is an expert in skills for the green transition and has been a great partner in organizing this webinar and making it happen. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists for donating your time and effort. I think, first of all, it's clear that we all care very deeply about making sure that workers are equipped with the necessary tools to manage whatever challenges they may be facing as we attempt to turn this ship around and make net zero a reality. Since there's really general alignment within the panel, we really want to use this webinar to create dialogue and conversation around nuances and how the perspectives of different stakeholder groups really shape their views on how career guidance and adult education can play their part in supporting workers in a just transition, in the green transition. So before we get started on the meat of the panel, some more housekeeping. We want to give all of the panelists the opportunities to speak and share their perspectives in the beginning. Afterwards, we've reserved about 30 minutes for Q&A. So either enter your questions in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and then we'll get to you at the end of the session. To start us off, I want to ask Romain to give sort of a general update on the state of adult education and career guidance within the EU and the European neighborhood. Since the green transition affects stakeholders on different levels, ranging from the effect on workers, employers, governments, and policymakers, how do you see the role of these different stakeholders and the role of career guidance in adult education to make sure that there will be a just green transition?
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, even though it's online. Thank you very much for having me on board. So to the question, what is the current state of play regarding adult education and career guidance? Well, the short answer is not enough. We see a persistently low participation in lifelong learning. The average for the EU is just above 10% of workers who took part in some form of training during the past year. I think somebody's got their mic on. So I was saying the average for the EU 27 is just above 10% of workers. And it's much lower for countries in the East or in the Balkans. It goes from 0.5% in Ukraine to just over 5% in Kosovo and Turkey. Similarly, for career guidance, we also find that most workers and learners have a limited view of the labor opportunities available to them, and importantly, are unaware of which training programs are available to them. So allow me to elaborate a bit. I think it has escaped no one that shifting to a functional green economy that is decoupled from resources use affects labor markets and skilling systems in profound ways. I don't need to explain how the COVID or artificial intelligence are changing the way we work, or that limiting your carbon emissions require doing things differently, or how the Russian invasion has actually accelerated our energy transition. Moreover, no one will disagree that achieving net zero carbon by 2050 is meaningless if inequality and social exclusion keep growing. I take this opportunity to remind ourselves that many regions are backsliding on their SDGs. So a green economy must also be fair and inclusive, in contrast to the current linear models, which largely generate inequality. So how does this affect people exactly? Well, for adults, we know that the accelerating technological advances and the increased emphasis on the sustainable economic models continuously change the way any job is done. I mean, for example, think about an electric car mechanic or a heat pump installer. They're still mechanics and plumbers, they just do it differently. But it also generates new occupations. I mean, think of urban farmers or sustainability officers just as examples. Young people are equally affected. They usually stay in education longer, they are more likely to enroll in online trainings, but the growing fragmentation of training provision and their relevance makes decisions more complex. So it is inevitable. Educating yourself on your career and training options, reskilling, upskilling to remain competitive are increasingly seen as integral parts of a 21st century working life. So our audience most probably expected this position from ETF, but we must all work to establish advanced career guidance services for learners and workers of all ages and all levels of education. And if we fail to do so, we set ourselves up to miss our green transition goals and not be able to deliver on our net zero objectives. #EU Green Week. So I already talked about how labor markets.
The Earth Commission was established 3 years ago. The first.
I think somebody has. Thank you. So I already talked about how labor markets are changing rapidly. This is a surprise to no one, but I also need to bring an additional layer of complexity related to the learning needs of the current and future workers. So there's a growing diversity of learners' profiles that make up the training demand. This is a change from the past. People work longer, so you find more age diversity, and people of different ages have diverse learning habits. Increasingly, low-skilled profiles also require training, so lifelong learning needs to be designed for a wider audience of learners, not only the highly educated. There's also bigger diversity in terms of the training expectations and the work aspirations of learners. We should not forget that the increasing importance of connecting informal and formal learning, as we must recognize that we do not learn only in schools, but throughout our lives, at work, online, with peers, and these learnings are also relevant for work. So how's the situation currently? Well, I've already said about 10% of EU workers take part in lifelong learning, and it's a little bit less for our Eastern neighbors and also in the Balkans. Although emerging data seems to indicate the figure is actually a little higher, probably due to COVID, but it's still too low. More precisely, the ETF ran a survey recently, and we also report some important features of this need. For example, there's a higher participation in training that is correlated with higher levels of education. So you've understood that on average, it's people with a higher level of education that will take up reskilling. Inversely, the unemployed people find it particularly difficult to access upskilling opportunities. This was 62% of the unemployed respondents in the EU that did not take part in any training activity in the past year. Online learning is now almost universally accepted as a satisfactory and credible learning option. That's almost 80% of respondents agreed with that statement. So it is a great opportunity to boost participation in education and training while developing your remote work skills. But in this situation, the digital divide is now the new problem that we must address. So basically, without access to lifelong learning, you are almost guaranteed labor market exclusion, particularly for low-skilled profiles. And so my colleague, Tim Schraber, will talk about this later, but I must mention that we are discussing the first principle of the European Pillar of Social Rights, whereby everyone has the right to quality and inclusive education, training, and lifelong learning to maintain and acquire skills. So in essence, the issue of remaining competitive on the labor market can even be seen through the lens of a fundamental human right. So around the globe, there is a paradigm shift from a supply-driven solutions towards learners' expectations and needs that demands more flexible arrangements for skills development, relevant career guidance, and also the increased presence of non-traditional providers, partly because this means reaching out to vulnerable groups. So countries and institutions need to move towards a more holistic approaches to skills development and responding to not only labor market demand, but also innovation. They need to also contribute to social inclusion as well as personal development. And this is the only way for the green transition to be human-centered, which I should remind ourselves is a prerequisite of the Paris Accord. Naturally, the other distinguished panelists will explain how challenges are very substantial. And I also suspect we will conclude that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There rarely is. But having said that, at the ETF, we have worked long hours on this issue. And here are some of the priorities that emerged as absolute essential building blocks for career guidance and lifelong learning to take off in any given economy, in or out of the EU. So for example, you need to ensure a robust qualification framework that makes up the backbone of the lifelong learning systems. It improves utility and it simplifies coordination, always a welcome move. Also, lifelong learning systems require more pragmatic validation of non-formal and informal learning. We should not need to take a course when we can demonstrate we already know the subject sufficiently, and that is irrespective of where or how these skills were developed. We should also emphasize the need to associate career guidance to social services, so that you can ensure social protection measures consider the individual needs to re-enter the labor market and benefit from the opportunities of the green economy. So this should not only include information on trainings and different career paths, but really a genuine counseling and orientation for learners who inevitably find it hard to enter and navigate the current world of work. So, and another issue we found very challenging is the difficulty to access data on this subject. Clearly, countries need to do more to capture the changes that occupations go through as technology develops on nearly a daily basis. Because it's only with high quality skills intelligence that you can adapt the training programs, advise the workers on their career prospects, and establish successful lifelong learning policies that are evidence-based. Lifelong learning and career guidance are essential to support the green and digital transition, as well as benefit from the opportunities. They prepare people for the continuous changes they can expect in their work life, their lives, and the world around them. So I will leave it here. I believe I've used up my time. I look forward to our discussion on this essential subject. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Romain. I think that was some really great and important points. One I want to emphasize is that many people already lack access to career guidance and lifelong learning, and this is among only growing challenges and only ever evolving labor markets. And it's most often, as you mentioned, marginalized and vulnerable groups who would benefit the most from accessing career guidance and lifelong learning, but those are also the ones that are least likely to have access and to access lifelong learning. So really great and important points. Thank you, Romain. Moving on to Jude and to the workers that are really at the center of this. So Industrial represents over 7 million working men and women within 180 national trade union affiliates in 38 European countries. many of these men and women will be affected by the transition to a green economy, some negatively, some maybe even positively, but it really puts workers at the heart of the transition. While there's obviously a need for short-term solutions, and Romain touched upon the necessity of social protection, but there's also the long-term needs such as reskilling and upskilling the workforce. So Jude, from the point of view of Industrial, where's the status quo really falling short, and what do workers really need?
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for the invitation to be part of the panel this morning. As you said, we represent 7 million workers, actually now in 39 European countries, since the trade union movement of Ukraine has just affiliated to Industrial Europe. But we estimate that something close to between 25-30 million workers in our sectors are impacted by the green transition. And the green, I think it's very clear that the green transition and the digital transition are now not separate transitions, but are increasingly impacting on each other, intensifying each other, and that's also then intensifying the pace and the scale of the transformations that are underway, and also the skills challenges which come with them. There is a difference between the two transitions. The green transition is a political choice. It's a choice that we as the trade union movement believe is fundamental. Action to tackle climate change is absolutely critical, but it is fundamentally a political choice. And through that choice, some jobs will disappear in some of our sectors. The vast majority of jobs will transform. The much larger number of jobs will transform, and the number of jobs which will be created is directly dependent on the industrial policy framework which is in place at different levels, and having really an economic plan for job creation, with quality job creation at its root, in terms of the transformations underway. So what we're experiencing is an industrial revolution driven by political choices, and therefore the social dimension is a political responsibility in our view. And to answer your question at a very macro level, what are we missing? We're missing the scale of ambition and policy needed in order to really address that social dimension. If we think about what we have in place in terms of legislation around emissions reductions, very hard rules when it comes to the drivers of change, but then extremely soft measures when it comes to managing the social dimension. We have a lot of voluntary initiatives. We have a lot of kind of coalitions of the willing. We have the European Pillar of Social Rights, which is very important for us, but where are the concrete implementing measures to ensure that those principles become a reality for workers in every corner of Europe? What we're seeing at the moment, which is extremely worrying for us, is that a patchwork across Europe of workers in some regions, in some sectors, have a package of measures to support their transitions, whereas in other regions, in other sectors, we're in a dust bowl without the adequate measures needed to really manage the scale of this transition. And I think that's why, for example, in a sector like the automotive industry, which represents 14 million workers across Europe, absolutely no framework at European level for the social transition. We're seeing self-organizing momentum developing from, on the one hand, industry and unions to try and deal with the transition, and on the other hand from regional governments who recognize that, you know, with the creation of the Automotive Regional Alliance, recognize that their region's economic future will be made or broken on the quality of this transition. So the lack of a just transition framework for the whole of the scale, if you like, of the Green Deal is for us a fundamental weakness. Within that framework, we think there should be an individual right for every worker to lifelong learning and training. And by making it, and I have to say, I agree with a lot of what Roman has said as part of the introduction, but by making it an individual right, we then hope that that will bring in behind the policy framework, the infrastructure to be able to apply that right, because people would be able to challenge legally if their right was not met. So that's really at the center. But we also, in our view, need to move from a very reactive approach to structural change, where workers are informed and consulted when a change has happened. That's the framework at the moment on information consultation rights, to a proactive agenda around anticipation of change. And that means a lot of the measures that you've already introduced in your introductions. It means full involvement in skills intelligence development, understanding where the jobs are today, where are the jobs tomorrow, how do we create pathways for individuals, because this transition will be felt as a continent. We can see the big numbers, 2.4 million automotive workers have to be upskilled and retrained by 2030 if we're going to, in order to meet the electrification needs. We need to move from 1.3 million workers in renewable energy to something like 3.5 million workers in the renewable energy sectors. These are the big numbers, but the transition will be felt by individuals in their workplaces, in their regions. And that then means that you need to have an anticipation agenda with workers as actors in the process and not recipients of decisions, not recipients of decisions by companies, by corporate management, or recipients of decisions by public authorities. Workers should be at the table at every stage right from the beginning. And this is a colossal industrial revolution in terms of reskilling and upskilling. We don't think that it's possible to do this in a kind of piecemeal fashion. There needs to be really a plan, if I can put it in those terms. Many of the elements, Roman, you've highlighted in your recommendations of what we see as also key elements of that plan. In our view, in terms of the financing, skills and training is the primary responsibility of employers to pay for. In lots of countries, that's paid through sectoral programs, so that there are measures to ensure that smaller companies are supported. We have to make sure that workers in SMEs are not left out in this transition. It's a big challenge for SMEs. I think it's very fair to say how you manage the reskilling and upskilling when you have a very small workforce. It has to be factored into the policy process. But in our view, in terms of the engagement, if the public authorities, if the public purse is putting investment into this transition, which we believe will be necessary, then, and is investing in companies in the transition, then in our view, there should be social strings attached. Every euro that is invested in companies in Europe should be tied with social conditionalities linked to just transition planning, to engagement in collective bargaining, and to ensuring that their workers have a right to training and that there is access. By tying social conditionality of public funds with an agenda around the scale of the upskilling and reskilling, we think that that will create a momentum where many of the pieces of the puzzle will come together. So this for us is really a missing bit of the puzzle. Then to come to the quality careers advice, obviously, if you're doing skills intelligence, you also need to have really good quality careers advice. As Roman said, all too often this is very poor signposting to training programs and not really thinking through how you build transition pathways for workers. The interests of business and industry are very important. We have enormous demographic challenges in many of the industries which are underway. So we need pathways for young people into industry, apprenticeship schemes, and kind of attractiveness programs around industry. But we also need pathways for workers from who don't see themselves as industrial workers, women, people come from different walks of life, so that actually that career advice is also opening up opportunities, and we're addressing some of the big labor shortages we have at the same time. And it must have an element which is about the ambitions and aspirations of the workforce. We all too often talk about everything being adapted to meet the needs of industry, but we shouldn't forget that workers have their own ambitions, their own aspirations, their own goals. And so the quality of the careers advice is also to identify where there are opportunities, changes. Maybe in this transition, there will be workers who move from sector to sector, people who start their own businesses, people who move out and go into academic studies or so on. What we're seeing in terms of practical examples, because I have been very general so far, but we have some really concrete examples where we see this is working really well. The first one at a national level would be the new Swedish collective agreement, which is all about reskilling and upskilling the workforce, but really in a balanced way where workers have access to paid leave, training leave, in order to assess what they want to do, not only in the case where their company is restructuring and they're losing their job, but actually at any time when they're at work. We have some really great company examples, often in companies which are quite high tech, so they understand that you have to keep your workers at the top of their game. In Safran, in Thales, for example, really good company agreements. And one of the best automotive agreements, and everybody would like to work there, Lamborghini in Bologna has a fantastic agreement, which is also about this combination of skills, intelligence, anticipation, and offering careers advice. Last point, and then I'll stop. For us, it's absolutely vital that everybody is at the table. And we think that the most relevant level of the table is the regional level, because this transition, because there will be movements between sectors, because there will be movements between within regions, we need to ensure that we have the public authorities of the region, the public employment services of the regions, the employers, the trade unions, and vocational education training services, all around the table to develop the plan. If we don't have that kind of everybody in at the beginning, everybody at the table, then we fear that we won't be able to meet the scale of the challenges that we face as a result of this extremely rapid and deep structural change that we're facing. Sorry if I was a bit long, but this is the view from industrial workers. We want nothing about us without us, and a just transition framework for Europe. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jude. And I think there's a couple of really important points to pick up on. The first that I noted down was workers as actors. I think we often talk about workers, about people affected by the green transition as sort of agents without agency in this transition. But to us, career guidance and making labor market information accessible to workers is really essential in helping people make informed decisions based on the realities of their local labor market, based on the fast evolving local labor markets, and taking into account the ambitions and aspirations that they themselves might have. So thank you so much, Jude. You also mentioned the responsibility of employers, so this might be a good time to move on to Delphine. Delphine, with CMAT representing around 200,000 companies in the metal engineering and technology-based industry space, there's obviously, these industries cover a wide range of employers that will experience the impacts of the green transition quite differently. Hearing what Jude just shared about what workers are going through, what the experiences and needs of workers are, how are employers responding to that responsibilities? How are employers ensuring that workers are not left behind? And on the flip side, what are employers doing to ensure that the workforce needs of the green transition are met, so that there are enough cable jointers to build the grid, linesmen and women to build the grid, that there are enough heat pump installers, etc. So, and what are the areas really where employers need support from governments and the EU?
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. First of all, I'd like to have two comments. First of all, I fully share the introduction that was made by Jude on the diagnosis, which is the state of play as regards the transition. So I will not repeat what she said. I'll just start where I got the solution, because I think this is where we don't fully agree on everything, even though we share quite a lot. I'll start at right to training. I think this is where I start to disagree, but even though not fully. Joke aside, I think that another common preliminary remark I have to make is that employers is not homogeneous and uniform concept, because in fact, when we talk about employer, there is a huge difference between what a multinational can do in terms of training and what an SME can do. And when we say we represent 200,000 companies, we have to know that 90% are SMEs and even more. I mean, a lot of our members are less than 50, less than 10 employees. So it makes a huge difference when you talk about how these companies can train their workers. So, and it's very important when we're talking about how they have to adapt and adjust to the transition. So I think this was an important remark to make before I can start. But I think it is important to say that when we talk about the green transition, CMET and Industrial, we've been working on this quite a lot over the last months and years. And it's true that even though we have different ways of approaching the topic on a number of things, it's true that we do believe this issue of upskilling, reskilling, and how we can approach this and how we can work together, we share a lot. And I think that as regard what Jude has been saying, what we agree on is that definitely when it comes to and reskilling, the first thing we have to definitely make sure is that we have a proper anticipation of what we need. Today, what we have definitely one of the biggest difficulty is that the decisions that have been taken, because I think that one of the points on which I fully agree with Jude is that the green transition is a political decision. So what our companies and their workers are facing at the moment has been imposed on our members, and definitely even though our members are committed to making this green transition a success, it is not an easy task on a daily basis, and they have to adapt to all this new set of rules. They have to adapt to what is coming on them. And the first thing that they have to do is to anticipate what it means in terms of changing skills requirement. What are the skills that will be needed for 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? We start to know, we start to see what are the implications, but it's a day-to-day exercise. And of course, it has different meanings in different companies, in different regions, in different parts of Europe. And this anticipation aspect is key. It is the start of everything we have to talk about. If you don't anticipate the skills needs, you don't know what you have to do in terms of upskilling and reskilling. You don't know how you have to approach this with your workers. And so you can't do anything. So the first things that we are working with in the frame of different projects, we are involved in at EU, but also our members at national, local, and regional level, it's the issue of anticipation of skills. After that, I think that once you have been able to identify the skills needs, I think that, of course, there are two different aspects. I think that Jude has mentioned the importance of involving the workers, and I think that for us, the importance is how do you involve the companies. Of course, we talk about the motivation of workers, we talk about the motivation of companies, and I think that multinationals are already involved quite a lot, and they do a lot for training. One of the difficulty we have is how do you convince SMEs? Of course, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that SMEs don't train their workers, but for them, there is an additional difficulties is that when you have a company of 10, 15, as soon as you send one of your worker in training, this is one person that doesn't work anymore. There is a loss of productivity. It is a complex thing. So I'm not even talking about the cost here. I'm just talking about how you can send someone in training without disrupting the production process. So this is something where, as employer organization, we have to do a lot of work on the ground to convince the companies that this is an investment and it's not, it's something that they have to understand and they have to accept. We can think that it's an easy thing, but on the ground, it's not always that easy. So there is a lot of things, a lot of work to do for SMEs. And we have to convince them that training their workers is an important part of their process. Of course, I mean, similarly, I think that it's also on the other side, how do you motivate workers sometimes to be trained, retrain, and go back to school or to training? I think that it's also sometimes a difficult exercise. We know that for some of the workers, going back to training is not always something easy. And that's why I think that the issue of career guidance and the quality of training is very important here. We have to invest into career guidance, which is very well understood. We need to have career guidance, which is adapted to the workers, but also we need to have training and retraining, which is also done in a way which is acceptable for the workers. Today, we know that, and Romain has mentioned that very clearly, you can have online training, you can have digital training, you can have ways of training which are not old-fashioned. When I mean old-fashioned is that we have some workers, they don't want to go back to school. They want to be able to train in a very flexible manner. They want to be trained on the job. And I think we have to make sure that we can develop this type of training which do not bring you back to school. So we have to think about being agile in the way we train people, and in the way also we exercise this career guidance so that it can be adapted both to the workers and to the employers in order for it to be integrated in the life of the company, so that it is not burdensome neither for the workers nor for the company. And this is certainly the best way to make sure that it can be a successful process and that is not seen as a burden for the worker or for the SME, because most of the time it is something that can be seen as a complicated process. I think that, of course, we know that the attractiveness, it has been mentioned by Jude, and for us, it is something that has been often discussed in our organization, both at Industrial, but also at CIMET. We had an event yesterday evening during which we discussed this topic very broadly. How do you convince people that working in the industry is something interesting? And I think that in terms of career guidance, it's an important point to mention. We have a lot of profiles that are mainly male dominated. And I think that it is something that we have to consider as employers, as company representatives, is how we can do better in order to attract the youngest generation, the girls as well, to come and work in our industry, to remain in our industry, but also to work in the production processes. Because for us, when you look at the percentage of women in the industry, in our industries, we are improving certainly over the years, but they remain in jobs which are mainly administrative and they do not come into production processes. So I think we have a lot to do as well in the career guidance process in order to be more attractive. And this is a lot to do as regard the way we also talk with the career counselors, advisors, so that they understand that working in the industry is something that can be relevant also for women, for girls. And this also, when you talk about career guidance, means that you have to talk to society and to parents so that they understand that our industry is an interesting, offers interesting career pathway. So there are many aspects to career guidance, whether it is to attract people to the industry from the start, or when it comes to changing jobs, upskilling or reskilling, changing careers throughout, because of course, adapting to the green transition mean that maybe you can, throughout your career, be obliged or be tempted also to change from one sector to the other because of the green transition. When it comes to funding, I think Jude mentioned the fact that it was for the employers to finance the training. I think we agree that employers have a major responsibility when it comes to funding training, and I think we accept that. However, I would like to mention that because the green transition comes from a political decision, and also because there is a lot of obligation falling, especially on SMEs, I think that in some regions there will be necessity also to get some support from the public authorities. I don't think that SMEs can finance alone entire sets of funding of training that will be needed for their workers. So I think that definitely employers can fund training for their workers, and I think they do. Generally, there is an obligation of funding which exists for the, and we appreciate that. I am not certain, I am even convinced of the contrary, that the right to training is the solution. To be very honest with you, being French, I had a right for training for many years. And I don't think that it's been very convincing in France, the right to training hasn't proven to be very efficient. But I think that definitely you have to make sure that proper funding is allocated to the training of workers, whether it is by the employers or by the public authority. And I would agree that social conditionality is an acceptable principle if companies do receive some funding in case they are needed. And here we are talking about SMEs who cannot support alone the funding of the training of their employees. But I think that in any case, what is important is that we make sure, as the community of stakeholders involved in this training issues, in this upskilling and reskilling issue, that there is a common understanding that lifelong learning is a necessity. I think it is important that we can convince companies that training is an investment and that it is not a cost, and that we can convince workers that they have to train themselves throughout their life, they have to retrain themselves throughout their working life, because for them, it is the guarantee that they will remain employable, that they can be guaranteed a job. I'm not sure you can say that, but at least that when they face the green transition, it can give them a better chance to go through the transition without being left behind. I don't want to say this because I don't like this expression that is used all the time in Brussels. Jude knows that. It's a promise that has been made by the Vice President of the Commission. I don't know if we can guarantee this promise to all the workers in Europe. I hope we can. We are working towards that. But I think that if all the workers could be upskilled and reskilled in Europe, and we can all work toward this goal, certainly it would be the best way to guarantee that no one is left behind. And I think that for that, we need a change of mindset towards the necessity to be reskilled throughout the working life, and that for this lifelong learning is a prerequisite. It is a necessity for all of us, for all the workers in Europe. And it is only with this condition that we can make sure that the green transition will be a fair transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Delphine. Yeah, some really important. I think some really important and relevant points. We tend to look at employers as sort of a uniform blob, without really taking into account that there are smaller SMEs, and that most of the employers are smaller SMEs, and that most people are employed by smaller employers. Picking up on that change of mindset, I think that is where we get to the European Union a little bit, and to Tim Schreiber. Tim, this event is taking place during the European Year of Skills and the EU Green Week, and I think the purpose of these events, the purpose of these thematic years of the EU is really changing that mindset and bringing that conversation around both the green transition as well as skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and skills in general to the forefront, and ensuring that these are policy priorities within the EU. However, within the EU, obviously countries are very, very different and are facing very different challenges. Given that there's no one-size-fits-all approach that works for all countries, that works for all employers, that works for all workers, what is the Commission and specifically DG Employment doing to ensure that governments are able to provide workers and employers with the tools, the toolkits that they need to manage the transition?
Thanks a lot, Simon, for the question, and good morning to everyone. Yes, as you said, the event today is part of the European Year of Skills and the EU Green Week. And we are very happy that this year the EU Green Week is also focusing on skills. So all the partner events, like the event we are attending right now, focus somehow on skills. So there are more than 200 events this week as part of the EU Green Week that somehow look at the issue of green skills. And I think this really shows how important such a year can be to really focus the spotlight on certain issues. As you said, the overall objective of the Year of Skills is to promote a mindset of upskilling, to raise awareness. It's of course very important, given what Romain said in the beginning, that the participation of adults is still far too low in training. So we need to do something, and I think we all agree that this is the common challenge, let's say, and also to encourage, of course, all relevant actors to step up efforts. And that's good that we also have today in the virtual panel really a diversity of all the actors that are involved, and that we can discuss together how to get it done. Now, the European Year of Skills puts a very strong emphasis on skills needed for the labor market and the green transition at the same time. Of course, not only the green transition is part of the European Year of Skills, but we all agree, I think, that together with the digital transition, the green transition is one of the main drivers why we talk about re- and upskilling at the scale that we do. And in fact, one of the objectives of the Year of Skills is to address the need, on the one hand, to look at people's aspirations and to also match these with labor market needs. So a bit to referring to what Jude was saying, that of course we also need to look at what are the people's aspirations, what do they want to do with their working life. And therefore, what we do in general on skills for the green transition is very closely linked to the priorities of the European Year of Skills. Now, coming a bit more closely at what we at EU level as European Commission can do when it comes to skills, I still would like to refer to the sentence that Delphine already mentioned before, namely that it is our ambition that we want to ensure a fair transition that leaves no one behind. Of course, we don't know if we will manage, but it should still be the ambition for us to manage. And this means when we talk about skills, to make sure that all the workers have the skills that they need to thrive in the transition. So those workers who will know whose job will disappear because of the transition, who work in sectors that will lose in terms of jobs because of the transition, but also those many workers who, as we also heard before, work in jobs whose content will change dramatically. Now, us as European Commission, we have set out our approach to skills for the green transition in the European Skills Agenda that was launched in July 2020. And that also responds to a few things I heard before. We always have to be aware what are the competencies that we have at EU level where we can make an impact. And when it is about social policy, and I would say even more about education and training policy, we have to say very clearly that our competences at EU level are very limited in terms of what we can do. So education and training policy is clearly, first of all, a national competence. So far, therefore, our action at EU level is focused on three pillars that I would like to go into a bit more detail now. So the first pillar would be that we support member states in equipping people with the skills for the green transition. How do we do that? We have in education and training policy the instrument of council recommendations at EU level. So this is one kind of legislation that can be adopted at EU level, but a softer one than directives and regulations. And we have, for example, adopted a council recommendation on vocational education and training in 2020, where a clear focus is on the digital and the green transition. We have a council recommendation that was adopted last year on a fair transition to climate neutrality, where education and skills was one of the 4 policy packages or policy areas considered key to ensure a fair transition. And what we can do at EU level to support member states is to facilitate mutual learning. Because as you said, Simon, member states are different. We face the same challenge, the challenge to become climate neutral, but the ways how to get there might be a bit different from country to country. So what we do is we facilitate mutual learning, exchange of best practices, to see, for example, we heard about the Swedish example, that colleagues from other countries can learn about how it is done in Sweden, which doesn't mean that it can be implemented one by one in other countries, but to get inspiration. To give a concrete example, we have under the European education area, a working group on vocational education and training and the green transition, which goes over a few years, where we regularly bring together representatives from EU member states, candidate countries, stakeholders such as social partners, to have technical exchanges how to best make our vocational education and training systems fit for the green transition. Then a second area of action at EU level that we're pursuing is to develop analytical tools to better understand and monitor skills for the green transition. Romain said it, we still have a big issue in understanding what exactly are the skills needed for the green transition. If you say green skills, people have very different understandings of what you're talking about. And still there is no kind of indicator or real quantitative data collection basis that would allow us to compare how the situation is across sectors, across member states, etc. So we have developed several tools to help member states reach a common understanding of what are the skills needed for the transition. Concrete example again, last year we published the ESCO taxonomy of skills for the green transition. So ESCO is a dictionary, you could imagine it, of occupations and skills, which allows you to see for a specific occupation, what are the skills needed for this occupation, and vice versa, to look at a specific skill and to see what are the occupations that require the job holder to have this skill. And what we did with this taxonomy of skills for the green transition is that we identified 381 skills, 185 knowledge concepts, and 5 transversal skills considered as most relevant on a greener labor market. Now, of course, this list is not exclusive, but we think it is still very important to give you an idea what are the skills that are more in demand because of the green transition. For example, to integrate biogas energy in buildings, to research locations for wind farms, or to advise on soil and water protection. So really in very different sectors, very different technical skills mostly. And the third area, and this has also been mentioned a few times before, is funding, where also us at EU level, we can make an impact. We can support member states by encouraging investments in skills, but also we provide money. We have an unprecedented amount of EU funding available through the long-standing funds like the European Social Funds, Erasmus+, but of course also the Recovery and Resilience Facility, where we really mobilized a lot of money to support skills development, to support workers in transition. We have the Just Transition Fund, which is targeting those regions that are particularly negatively affected by the green transition to provide targeted funding. And again, to give a concrete example, because I think that's always very useful, under Erasmus+, we have an initiative that is going on for a few years already now, which is called Centers of Vocational Excellence. So the idea is that these centers gather a wide range of local partners, including vet providers, employers, research centers, etc., develop local skills ecosystems, but also work together with international partners. And there we have a number of centers that focus on topics such as renewable energy, sustainability, etc. So that are all very relevant for the green transition. And why did I pick this example? Because we see that vocational education and training is particularly important for the green transition. Many of the jobs job profiles that have been mentioned already, the car technician, the guy who puts the solar panel on the roof, all these are professions that usually require vocational education and training. And there we are faced with a long-standing image issue, I would call it, lack of attractiveness, that still vocational education is often seen as second choice compared to higher education. And there it's not only because of the green transition, but the urgency becomes higher with the green transition, that we need to make sure that we have the technicians in photovoltaic, wind energy, hydrogen, etc., then to make the green transition happen. And that brings me to my last point that I still wanted to mention, that on the 1st of February, the Commission presented what we call a Green Deal industrial plan. You might have heard about it. The idea is to enhance the competitiveness of Europe's net zero industry. So it's a classical industrial strategy initiative. But, and we are very happy about this, skills actually are one of the 4 key pillars of this strategy, which shows that really by now skills have been mainstreamed, if you want, into policy making, also into industrial policy making. And it's more and more consensus that we will not deliver on the green transition, the industrial transition, but also the green transition very broadly if we do not have the people to implement it on the ground. So far from me. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks a lot, Tim. And I think that's very much the need of focusing on people, focusing on workforces, focusing on skills in enabling the green transition. Hi, so I was gone for a second there, just at the right moment. I think, Tim, you had finished your point. Thank you so much. I think focusing on workforces, focusing on skills, focusing on the readiness of people to deliver on a green transition is a really important point. Also, you mentioned some EU programs here that are quite relevant for our next speaker, George. At DEPA, the Greek Public Employment Service, your responsibilities include the Recovery and Resilience Facility as well as Next-Gen EU funds. Currently, DEPA is implementing a large-scale upskilling program with around 500,000 beneficiaries financed by the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Given your experience with EU policies, EU funding, how that funding trickles down to the actual implementing parties, trickles down to the countries, how is the funding really reaching those needs, and where do governments, where do public sector actors need help specifically in connecting with employers, connecting with workers, connecting with those most affected, and how does the reality of implementing these funds differ from the policy prescription and the intentions in Brussels?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the invitation. Now, indeed, I would like to skip the general statements on the importance of green skills and other things we have all heard a million times in Brussels events. And I would like to briefly share some operational insights from my experience with this project, which is currently underway. Now, one of the biggest challenges we had to face when designing this program on digital and green skills was the dimension of green skills. Now, when it comes to digital skills, without, of course, disregarding the evolution of the field, we more or less have a clear view of the software, the programming languages involved, as well as a different type of job roles. However, when it comes to green skills, the picture is not as clear. And there are different challenging elements to that. The one has to do with defining green skills. Now, at the time of the design of the RRF, there was no definition at the EU level of what a green skill is. Since then, we know that the EU Commission has put a lot of emphasis on the new skills taxonomy introduced. But from our experience, green skills are a fluid concept that cannot necessarily fit within a taxonomy, since they often depend on the context of a specific job. The same job can be green or brown in different contexts. So it is not enough to focus on skills per se or occupations per se, but it's important to have more information regarding the specific needs in different sectors and different locations when it comes to shifting towards a green economy. Another important challenge I found was the lack of credible training programs and certification when it comes to green skills. I think that the dimension of training provision is often neglected when discussing new skills. We kind of take it for granted that whatever training we decide to do will be available. However, in many countries, this is not actually the case when referring to new types of skills, such as green skills. So in our initiative, we had training providers come in and submit their programs, and we had external experts evaluate the quality of these programs. And it turned out many of them were very popular with trainees. So they ranged from more technical ones, like managing a photovoltaic park, to more theoretical ones, like entrepreneurship in the green economy. However, and this is what I found more problematic, there was no way to know if these certifications would actually increase the chance of job seekers to find new or better jobs. And the reason is that there's an information gap. A company doesn't know exactly what these certifications are and what their related training programs mean in terms of actual knowledge acquired, simply because the sample size is still quite small, right? These are new certifications. They have not been tested extensively. This is not the case in digital skills, for instance, where you have many established high-level certifications. So there's a long way to go when it comes to bridging the gap between designing policy initiatives and helping the job seekers send the right signals to employers. Now, of course, I can't say that what I'm mentioning applies to every country, obviously, in the EU, but I am aware of the fact that similar dynamics do exist in quite a few other EU member states. So to conclude, and I will be quite brief, it is tempting to pursue these big, ambitious projects when it comes to green skills. And in certain contexts, they can indeed be useful, for instance, when approaching the issue from the prism of environmental literacy, as previously mentioned. However, what I believe is that when it comes to helping people upskill and reskill and pursue a better future in the green economy, we have to be more specific. As mentioned, I think by Romain previously, there is no optimal one-size-fits-all approach. There never is. It is imperative for governments to actually engage with the sectors playing a key role in the shift towards a green economy. And I don't mean engage in the sense of having a few meetings, but consistently working together in order to identify the skills required in specific sectors and specific regions. And I agree with one of the previous speakers, which focused on the regional level. It's very important to focus on the regional level. The country level is too broad. And it's important also to focus on how we're going to provide these skills, because as I mentioned, we take for granted that we will have training providers available for every type of training. This is definitely not the case. So we need to have a clear mapping of the training providers and the certifications offered in each region, in each sector. And so this means at the policy level, agreeing on specific curricula, engaging with employers, with workers, and finding specific training curricula, specific training providers. We have to get into the detail. It's not enough to just launch these big programs. And throwing money at the problem is not enough. I mean, we saw with the RRF, yes, we had a lot of money. That wasn't the problem. It wasn't the problem to find money. It was the exact design, targeting specific needs. And it is not enough to have a label that says green skills. You know, it's a nice label. It makes everyone feel better about themselves, but it's not enough. And it's also not enough to limit ourselves to top level initiatives that we just hope will magically trickle down to the local level. We need tailor-made approaches that will meet actual needs and have measurable outcomes. And this requires a lot of hands-on work at the policy level, from data gathering to program design. And that obviously isn't easy, but it is, in my view, the only way to provide real value in the context of a shift towards a green economy. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, George. And this reminds me of a problem that we have found in some of our projects where we sort of figured out how to design a training program, etc. But then there were no trainers available that could actually teach those skills. So there's even, I think that's for sort of thinking about these transitions very early, because you never know what challenges you're going to encounter, right? And that was not something we had initially thought about, that, well, actually finding trainers, actually finding educators who can administer and teach these programs can be quite difficult, especially if those are very new, very emerging, very in-demand skills. Thanks a lot, George. Very, very much appreciated, and also appreciate the brevity, since we are going a little bit long. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat now or raise your hand, and we'll get to you after our next contributor. Hae-Kyung, thank you so much. Having heard from trade union employers and national, supranational entities, it is the role of the International Labour Organization, the ILO, to facilitate this tripartite social dialogue and sort of between the wheels in these interactions. The UN agency really concerned with the world of work and workers. How does the ILO view the role of career guidance and adult education? And what is the ILO doing specifically to help enable workers, employers, and governments?
I think I got the grasp of the question. Thank you for the question. And yeah, it's not a very easy job to speak at the end. All points very well said. I share the ILO also shared the view of European Union, ETF, our social partners, the public employment services. I don't think I should repeat that what all the points that has well been said. Of course, we also agree that career guidance and adult education is the key for the green transition. And as I guess you also know about our global report on skills development for skills for green jobs, emphasizing the needs of reskilling and upskilling and how that skill has to be upgraded. So I won't go in detail, but just one thing that I would like to also reiterate what has been mentioned, that at the ILO, of course, in this rapidly changing world of work, where we also live quite longer than before, and at the same time, a net zero is demanding a lot of changes on our behaviors, on our production process, product services that we consume and also produce. It also implies that how we learn should be changed. That already the previous speakers already mentioned that lifelong learning is very important. That I think we shouldn't look at the green transition is really in an isolated manner, but not only digital transition, all that global mega trends that comes with it, with demographic change, global value chain changes, global trades are all happening at the same time simultaneously. That when it comes to talk about skills development, I think we need to actually also contextualize this mega trends that are forming a web of very dynamic and very intertwined factor that's reshaping the world of work in one way or another. So we definitely have to move away from the thinking that learning ends at the compulsory education and training, but to the notion of lifelong learning. And that's why we need to encourage the learning mindset. I think another previous speaker mentioned about it, mindset of this workforce, and also prepare the young people for the lifelong green learning and also prepare multiple changes throughout their careers. So in this context, the ILO has been very active supporting the governments, social partners, and education and training providers to make this transition a little more smooth and just and fair through various policy advice research, policy advice, and also technical assistance through projects and partnerships. I won't be able to share everything what we're doing, but just to highlight a few things that are relevant. First of all, we support the countries to enhance their policy coherence between skills, employment, environmental, and sectoral and industrial policies. Sometimes the policies work in silos, and that's what we have seen a lot in our case studies and our research, that there isn't much coherence between many of those policies. So we support countries to enhance the policy coherence and coordination with a strong engagement of social partners who also have a high stake in greening agenda. And this is the key for any effective design, planning, and implementing and monitoring of policies on skills development for green transition. And second, we also support to build effective skills anticipation and matching system, which was very highly emphasized by our partner from the employer side, that we need to know what's going to happen in the future. With better information and data on the skills needs, we can only make much more informed policy choice, and then we can adapt the competency-centered curricula, apprenticeship, and training programs that meets the needs of the labor market demand and also the aspiration of the workers. So we have various tools that we use, that we implement on the country level. Just to highlight two very practical tools that we use a lot, one on skills anticipation for green jobs, and one tool on greening TVET and skills development. So this is the practical tool that we have been implementing in various countries at the global level. Third, we also help to implement countries a complex set of policy measures such as social protection, active labor market policies, career guidance, counseling initiatives. That of course, effective skills anticipation system is important, but also good effective qualification system and labor market institutions are key for any of the skills interventions. Last but not least, I think this point wasn't too much emphasized, but disadvantaged and vulnerable groups such as older workers women, migrants and refugees and people with disability, they all need to be included in the skills development programs to make this transition just for everyone. So the ILO support countries and social partners to expand financing and increase apprenticeship opportunities, and also strengthen the role and capacity of teachers and trainers so that they can deliver more inclusive and effective training at the end. So the ILO believe that with a broader stakeholder engagement, bringing, of course, the social partners on board, enhancing policy coherence and coordination, and anticipating better about the future with the inclusive component, we can only then advance this just transition agenda for all. So yeah, I'll stop here and happy to take any questions further. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hae-Kyung. And I don't, when my internet last cut out, I lost the chat, so I don't know if there are any questions. If there are, so please let me know if there are. If there are not, I think there's one point that I would like to pick up on, and it's sort of, I think there's such broad alignment and broad agreement in this room, in this panel, about the importance of career guidance and the importance of adult education, both in helping workers to a just transition and in enabling the workforce needs of the green economy. So if around this theme of agreement, alignment, collaboration, I think Jude mentioned some practical examples of positive implementations around lifelong learning and just transition, but we were hosting a panel at the last COP, and we were looking for good examples of just transition. And there simply weren't that many. So if there's such broad alignment and agreement, where are the practical solution? Where's the practical implementation? I don't know if I would like to ask the panel, and any panelists, please feel free to jump in here. What is holding us back? What is keeping us from implementation? Where and why are we falling short in translating these commitments, this alignment, this agreement in a room into action and into programs that actually affect and positively impact the lives of people?
Maybe because you mentioned me, I'll break the ice, if that's okay for you. I think it's a really fair comment. In fact, Delphine and I were yesterday afternoon in a meeting with Commissioners Nicola Schmidt and Thierry Breton, talking about the social transition in the automotive industry, which is a colossal kind of example of the transition which is underway also in other sectors. And the comment was made of what if there's so much consensus from industry, from regional actors around what's needed, why isn't there the kind of drive? I have maybe 2 points. I think one is that we haven't seen, and that's our analysis, we haven't seen the political engagement on the social implications of the transition that we've seen in terms of the kind of the legislative framework around the industrial legislation, you know, the emissions rules. And I think that lack of real political engagement at every level. We have some very engaged regional authorities who are at the actual and the proverbial coalface, and are looking at what their regional economies will look like in the future, and know that this has to be part of the story. But they maybe miss some of the tools, because some of the tools stem from other levels, and you don't have this concerted political engagement. And we've been saying to the Commission that really what we need now, from now to 2030, is a decade of just transition. That really this should be the top priority, because the danger is that if it's not, the reality on the ground for a lot of workers is being promised something is coming, but not seeing it in their daily lives. And that creates cynicism, and it creates a lot of political dangers along the way. At the same time, I think it's right to say that we have a contradictory situation. Delphine and I, we sit in discussions at European level. I think we agree on quite a lot. There are some big things that we disagree on, but we agree on quite a lot. But across Europe, we have a very difficult situation in terms of the level of social dialogue in big parts of Europe. We have very fragile industrial relation systems in some countries which are experiencing the transition in a very acute, intense way. And what we found as Industrial Europe, we've done several years now of many roundtables at regional, sectoral, national level with within the trade union movement, gathering evidence right from the ground, is that our difficulty is that transitions are perceived as more negative and more worrying by workers where there isn't strong and stable industrial relations. So if you don't have the enabling conditions and the framework where people feel that they are heard, where they have a stake, where they are able to negotiate their future, then this whole discussion takes on a very different character. And they're also the parts in Europe, if I think about Romain's introduction, they're the parts in Europe where workers don't have access to training programs, don't have access to quality careers advice. So this is really a major challenge for us, this patchwork of experiences, whether it's in companies or regions, is for us one of the biggest challenges. And that's why we need real political leadership to make this a top priority at the level of the EU. Thanks.
Thank you, Jude. I think it was Tim, then George, then Romain. If I have that right.
Yeah, all very good. Now I wonder, because you were asking why don't we see big good practice examples that we can share. I would first of all like to acknowledge that the challenge is big, that the scale, I mean, I think Judith mentioned how many people just in the automotive industry need train upskilling. I mean, we're talking about huge numbers. We have this objective that by 2030, 60% of adults in the EU should participate in training once per year, and we start from something like 36, 37%. So the gap is huge. Therefore, I think we also need to acknowledge that it will take time to see concrete results. It feels like the European Green Deal has been around forever, but actually it's been just 3.5 years ago that this really got this very big drive at EU level. If we think about how long it takes to develop training programs or curricula, then 3.5 years is still relatively short term. So that is one thing. And then the other challenge I see right now is that we know that there are many very good practice examples across Europe, very innovative schools, very advanced schools, very good programs, but we need to mainstream this. I mean, for us, it's good to find examples to put in speeches, to put in briefings, etc. But now I think the challenge is really to roll out these good examples across the board, that also the VET schools that are maybe not in the innovation hubs, they offer this kind of programs, etc. And one thing I wanted to mention is we have this working group on VET and the green transition, and we have compiling a compendium of good practice examples in different areas when it comes to VET and the green transition. We'll publish this in the coming weeks. And we think that this is one way how we, with the limited legislative competencies we have at EU level, when it comes to skills, where we can make an impact by spreading good practice examples, by sharing these examples, so that also schools across Europe can learn from each other, etc. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
George?
Yes, I think you touched upon a broader problem, where you have people in Brussels, gathering and exchanging, pleasantries and, big ideas and stuff. But there's a gap between that and actual policy making on the ground, right? So no matter what we say here, I mean, most of you are not actually going to implement any actual upskilling program if you don't know how hard that is. And most people don't, right? I mean, I go to all these events and you hear the same things, you know, just transition, leave no one behind, blah, 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 blah. But you don't know what it actually requires to, you know, get into the dirt, right? Find what actual skills are needed in every place, you know, you engage with workers, with companies. And I think that's indicative of a problem we have in the EU in general. This is, you know, this is an elite context right now, this EU exchanging like top level ideas, but there is agreement here, obviously, right? But when it comes to the people actually implementing the policies, they're not here, they're not, you know, exchanging these views. So, you know, it's very often kind of frustrating as a policymaker on the ground to, you know, to hear all these stuff get repeated again and again and again. But I think there should be a much better connection between, you know, the actual policymakers on the ground and, you know, the actual policy guidelines set out at the Commission level. But this is a broader issue, of course, right? This isn't limited to skills. Thank you.
Romain?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear that? Yeah. Okay, so I mean that question, you know, depending on who you ask, you'll get a complete different answer depending on what their professional background is, very likely. So I'm going to stick to one. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons why we are lagging in terms of a process and results, but I'll just pick on one of the issues that certainly from the point of view of the ETF is a main obstacle. So you cannot manage what you do not measure. So my argument is that skills intelligence is a foundational building block of the green transition. We miss out on the colossal magnitude of the work ahead because we do not have granular longitudinal data on the changes in the labor markets and the skills acquisition that go with it. Now, a lot is being done. Tim earlier listed a full list of EU initiatives, which are very useful. We use them, in fact, at ETF ourselves. But through my discussions and field visits, I can see that on the ground, most of the stakeholders do not have the full picture on what is happening or what needs to happen. And this is down to partially the lack of skills intelligence. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Romain. Hak-Yong, and I think we have one question from the audience, so I'd ask you to keep it quite brief.
Yeah, I won't add more, but just to reiterate what George said, I think the problem is really when we make policy formulation, policy designing.
I think Hai-Kung had her hand up.
Oh, can you? Yeah, I can hear her.
Can you cannot hear me?
I can. Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, so yeah, I think the issue is really that some stakeholders' involvement are coming as an afterthought, that at the table of policy making, we really have to bring the key stakeholders on board, not the policy making process happening at the higher level and then trickling down, but it should be really merged from sometimes top down and bottom up, and also bringing all the key stakeholders together to the tables. And that's very easy to say, I know, but that's something that really we have difficulty kind of bringing on board and really institutionalizing, and also making it mainstream in many countries that we have our projects and partnerships. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate and also reemphasize how social dialogue in that sense is very important. Easy to say again, but it's really the key to bring these policies and measures for everyone to the same page. And yeah, as ILO perspective, I wanted to just highlight that part. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Hak-Yong. And picking up on the question from the audience, Asel asked, like, how are we in the EU incorporating skills-based hiring, skills-first hiring? And I think that's it's a quite interesting question because it's a huge trend, especially in the US and I think in Singapore as well, to really focus more on people's skills rather than their resumes and titles, etc. And that also goes in line into themes we picked up on earlier, such as recognizing prior learning, recognizing skills rather than degrees and titles, no matter where they were acquired. So maybe I can aim this at the employers, because I think that's where the acceptance and ultimate success of these strategies comes from. Delphine, what are you seeing in terms of skills-based hiring? Are employers within CMAT going beyond the resume and cover letter that we typically see, and are focusing more on the skills of people rather than sort of these signaling effects that we see in the typical application documents?
I don't think there is one straightforward answer, but I think there is a trend to look more and more at what people can bring to the company. So it goes much beyond the resume, the qualification, the diploma you have. I think what companies are looking for is really what you can bring to the company in terms of added value. So your competencies, the skills you've acquired, and it goes beyond the diploma you've acquired. So I think that definitely it's there is this trend that we look at all the soft skills that you have, and not only the technical skills, and I think that it is more and more important. And it will be a growing trend that companies look at an individual as a whole, and not only a line on the CV, because I think it's an old-fashioned way of looking at things. So I think that by discussing with members, you can see that more and more that diplomas are not what people, and companies and HR managers are looking at. I think that's it's not the trend anymore. Of course, you have to have some criteria, so that's one of the things. And in some profession, it's definitely important. But I think that you can be tested without having to prove that you have a certain diploma. But if you are able to do the job, then I think that is often sufficient. And definitely what companies are also looking like is your capacity to work in a team, to have soft skills and things like that, which are definitely also extremely important nowadays. So yeah, to answer your question, is yes.
Great. Yeah, I think that's sort of a nice clothing statement, that skills are becoming more important. People should be able to access skills through lifelong learning, adult education, and make informed decisions about their learning and work journeys by receiving access to labor market information, skills anticipation, skills intelligence through career guidance. So I want to thank everybody very much for participating and for attending this webinar. I think we're 2 minutes over, so I don't want to rob anybody of any more time. Hour and a half, 90 minutes of your morning is long enough. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to all the panelists for attending. Thank you for contributing. And if you have any questions, if you want to chat about career guidance, adult education, and a just and green transition, please feel free to get in touch with me, with Romain, with any of us. And thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.